Abandoned dog and her puppies left to die. You won't believe what happens next. Luna's paws scraped against the damp ground, her body trembling as she huddled next to her newborn puppies. The storm raged on above, thunder cracking through the air like an ominous warning. She tried to keep her pups close, pressing her body against them for warmth, but they were weak, too weak. The smallest one whimpered faintly, struggling to nurse, but Luna had little to offer. Her own hunger gnawed at her, but survival was about the pups now. The sound of an engine drew her attention. A car approached, its headlights cutting through the rain-soaked night. Luna's heart raced. She didn't trust people anymore, not after the man who had abandoned her. He had been her owner, but tonight he was something else entirely. The car came to a stop just a few feet away. The door opened. Luna's ears flattened, and she instinctively pulled her puppies closer. She knew what was coming even before the man stepped out of the car. "Get out," he muttered, slamming the door behind him. He was drunk, his eyes unfocused as he staggered over to where Luna lay. He looked at her, at them, with a coldness that chilled her to her core. There was no warmth, no sympathy, just indifference. He knelt down and grabbed her collar, yanking it roughly. Luna resisted, but it was no use. She was too weak, her body too frail from days of hunger. With one final jerk, he ripped the collar off, tossed it aside, and pointed down at the pups. "You're on your own now," he said, as if she could understand him. With a cold, dismissive look, he turned and walked back to the car. Luna didn't chase after him. She couldn't. Her legs shook, and her heart broke as she watched the man drive away, leaving her and her puppies stranded. The rain came down harder, drenching them further. But Luna didn't move. She wouldn't abandon her babies. No matter how cruel the world had been, she would fight for them. As the car disappeared into the night, Luna let out a soft, desperate whimper, knowing that whatever came next, it was just the beginning of a fight she couldn't lose. The silence that followed was deafening. Luna stayed huddled against her puppies, barely able to breathe without trembling. Her body was weak from hunger, her fur soaked through by the relentless downpour. She shifted slightly, trying to keep her tiny ones close, but their pitiful little bodies were still so frail. The smallest, a little black and white one, barely moved, his eyes closed as if he'd given up already. Luna whimpered softly, nudging him with her nose, but the effort felt hopeless. The cold was too much for them. Her mind was clouded, but there was one thought that repeated over and over like a broken record: "I can't let them die." She curled around them even tighter, her body shaking, but she wouldn't leave. Not now. Not when they needed her most. Her instinct to protect them was stronger than the fear gnawing at her insides. Minutes passed, maybe hours, Luna couldn't tell. Time had become irrelevant. She only knew that she couldn't sleep, couldn't close her eyes without checking to make sure her babies were still breathing. And then, as the night grew deeper, she heard it again. The sound of an engine, distant at first, then louder. Luna's ears perked up. A car pulled into the lot. The headlights flickered through the rain like a warning, and for a moment, she froze. Could it be him again? No, it couldn't be. She could feel the cold, calculating presence of someone else. The car stopped and the engine went quiet. Luna's muscles tensed, but she didn't move. The door opened and a man stepped out. This time, there was no stumbling or drunken slur. His movements were sharp, purposeful. He looked down at Luna, at the pups, and the expression on his face was different. It wasn't the cruel indifference of the man who had abandoned them, it was something colder, something more calculated. Luna growled softly, unsure whether it was out of fear or a warning to him. The man didn't seem to care. His eyes scanned the scene, Luna's ragged form, her struggling puppies, and a twisted smile crept onto his face. "You poor thing," he muttered. But there was no sympathy in his voice. It was mocking. He stepped closer, his boots crunching on the wet gravel, and Luna instinctively stood, her body tense. She felt the hairs on the back of her neck rise as the man kneeled down in front of her. His hand reached out, but Luna didn't trust him. She snapped, a desperate attempt to warn him to stay away. But he was prepared. He grabbed her collar and yanked it hard. "No," she whined, but her resistance was futile. The man dragged her across the gravel, each movement harsher than the last. With a final, cruel pull, he threw her aside. Luna's body hit the cold ground with a sickening thud, but the pain barely registered in her mind. As she struggled to stand, she looked up in time to see him turning back to his car. His words hung in the air, cutting deeper than anything physical. "Not my problem anymore," he said, and before Luna could react, the car was speeding away. The silence returned. Luna remained lying in the wet, muddy gravel, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Her body was broken, but her spirit, her desire to protect her puppies, remained. With a fierce growl, she pushed herself up, her legs shaky but determined. Her pups were still alive. They were still breathing. She wasn't giving up. Not yet. She nuzzled them once more, her body instinctively curling around them, the rain and the cold forgotten in the face of her overwhelming need to protect. I won't let you die, she thought, though it felt like she was the one already on the edge of life and death. The sound of Luna's soft, frantic whimpers filled the air as she lay on the cold, wet gravel, her body aching with exhaustion. Her once glossy coat was matted and dull, weighed down by the relentless rain. But she didn't care about herself. All that mattered now was her babies. She nudged them with her nose again, her movements slow and deliberate, as if each touch carried a silent prayer. The smallest one still wasn't moving much. His chest barely rose and fell with each shallow breath, and Luna felt her heart twist. She licked his tiny face gently, hoping to coax some strength into him. But nothing happened. The storm continued to rage around them, a reminder that time was running out. Luna's body trembled, not from the cold but from the gnawing fear that if help didn't come soon, her pups wouldn't survive. Her ears perked up again as the faint sound of tires on wet asphalt reached her ears. Another car. She was too weak to move, too exhausted to bark for help, but her heart skipped a beat. Could it be someone else? Someone who would save them? Luna pushed herself up with all her remaining strength, her legs shaking beneath her, and staggered to the edge of the lot. She kept her pups close, sheltering them as much as she could from the downpour. She didn't want to let them go, didn't want to leave them alone. Her instinct told her to stay close to protect them, but the sound of the approaching car grew louder. This time, the vehicle slowed as it neared her. Luna held her breath, her body instinctively moving in front of her puppies to shield them. She didn't know if she could trust whoever was coming, but she didn't have much choice. She couldn't do this alone. The car stopped a few feet away. The engine cut off, and for a moment, everything was silent. Then the car door opened and Luna tensed, ready to defend her family. Anna stepped out of the car looking around. She had heard about a stray dog and her puppies from a local shelter, but she wasn't prepared for what she found. The scene was heart-wrenching, Luna, thin and weak, surrounded by her barely alive pups. Anna's eyes locked onto Luna's, and there was an unspoken understanding. Luna didn't growl, didn't show any sign of aggression. She just stared at Anna, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and hope. "It's okay," Anna whispered, crouching down slowly to avoid scaring her. She stretched her hand out gently, her voice soft but steady. "I'm here to help." Luna, hesitant but desperate, took a cautious step forward. Anna could see the hesitation in her movements, the uncertainty in her eyes. She was afraid, but her instincts told her this woman wasn't like the others. Anna's heart clenched as Luna moved closer, her body trembling, and she reached out to touch her gently. The moment their hands met, Luna let out a quiet, relieved whine, as if she'd been holding onto the smallest sliver of hope, and now, finally, someone was offering her the help she so desperately needed. Anna pulled her in close, whispering words of comfort, knowing this was just the beginning of a long journey for both Luna and her pups. Luna's eyes closed briefly, her body sinking into the warmth and safety Anna offered. She had fought so hard to protect her babies, but in this moment she didn't have to fight anymore. There was help now. And it was the first time in days that she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they would be okay. "Let's get you all to safety," Anna murmured, lifting Luna gently. Luna, weak but trusting, allowed herself to be carried. Anna didn't know how long it would take, how many struggles lay ahead, but she knew one thing: she wouldn't let them go. Not now. The rain continued to fall, but for Luna, there was a flicker of hope, a light in the storm. The soft hum of the car engine was a strange comfort to Luna, who lay in Anna's lap, her body trembling but finally no longer in immediate danger. Her puppies, wrapped in soft towels, were nestled in a crate in the back seat, but Luna could barely take her eyes off them. She watched their little bodies rise and fall with each shallow breath, praying they'd make it through the night. The tension in her chest hadn't eased, her mind still raced, and she couldn't shake the fear that time was running out. Anna glanced at her in the rearview mirror, her heart heavy with concern. She had worked at the shelter long enough to know that not all rescue stories ended well, especially when the animals were as fragile as these pups. Luna, she could see, was barely holding on. The shelter wasn't equipped for such delicate cases, not without more resources, not without more help. But she couldn't abandon them now. Not after finding them like this. As the car sped through the wet streets, Anna felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. She had hoped for something more, A miracle perhaps, but this wasn't a fairy tale. This was real life, and real life didn't always offer happy endings. The pups were weak, too weak to know how to fight for their survival. And Luna was on the edge. If they didn't act fast, they could lose them all. The shelter came into view. It was small, old, and cramped, but it was all Anna had. There were no fancy facilities, no room for emergency surgeries, no funds for costly treatments. It was a place for the forgotten, the abandoned, the neglected. And yet, it was also a place where hope sometimes found a way to survive. Anna parked the car and rushed out, her shoes slapping against the wet pavement. She moved quickly, not bothering to lock the car. Luna was still in her arms, her body limp but warm. Anna didn't know how much longer Luna could hold on. The pups were still breathing but barely. Time was slipping away. Inside the shelter, a volunteer named Jake was already waiting. His tired eyes lit up when he saw Anna approach, and he immediately stepped forward to help. "I didn't think you'd get here so fast," Jake said, his voice hushed with concern. He looked at the puppies in the crate, his face falling. "How bad is it?" "I don't know," Anna replied, her voice cracking. "But we need to act fast. I don't think Luna has much time left, and the pups, they're in critical condition. I don't think they'll make it through the night unless we do something now." Jake nodded, and they both rushed into the back room, where the shelter's makeshift clinic was. The shelves were lined with basic supplies: bandages, antiseptic, antibiotics, but little else. Anna had hoped for more, but there was nothing to be done. They had to make do. Luna was gently placed on the table, her eyes dull but still aware enough to lift her head and look at Anna, a silent plea for help. Anna's heart broke in two. "I'm so sorry, Luna," she whispered, brushing her hand through the dog's damp fur. "We'll do everything we can." As Jake prepared the medical supplies, Anna focused on the puppies, who were now wriggling weakly, their cries faint and pitiful. Luna's ears twitched and she let out a soft whine, as if knowing that Anna wasn't alone in her fight anymore. It wasn't just her. She wasn't the only one fighting for them now. Hours passed as Anna and Jake worked tirelessly, checking vitals, administering fluids, and doing everything in their power to stabilize Luna and her pups. The shelter was quiet, the only sound the faint whimper of the puppies and the soft clicking of the clock on the wall. Luna watched it all, her body weak but her mind sharp. She could feel the care in Anna's hands, the determination in her voice. For the first time since her abandonment, Luna felt the faintest stirrings of hope. But she couldn't afford to relax. Not yet. Not until she was sure. As the minutes turned into hours, Anna and Jake's efforts slowly began to show results. Luna's breathing became less labored. One by one, the pups began to make small, tentative movements. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep them going. Anna wiped the sweat from her brow, her arms sore, her eyes bloodshot from exhaustion. But she didn't stop. Not until she heard Luna's soft, relieved sigh. The pups were still fragile, but they had made it through the worst of it. They weren't out of the woods yet, but they had a chance. Luna had a chance. And for the first time in days, Luna allowed herself to close her eyes, just for a moment, knowing that they weren't alone anymore. There was a flicker of something, hope perhaps, that promised the fight wasn't over yet. The early morning light filtered through the thin curtains of the shelter, casting a soft glow on the room where Luna and her puppies lay. Anna sat beside them, her face pale from exhaustion but her eyes unwavering. Luna rested her head on her paws, her body still fragile but no longer teetering on the edge of life and death. Her breathing was steady, though faint. The pups, too, were showing signs of improvement, tiny movements, quiet whimpers, and a slight increase in their energy. But Anna knew it wasn't over yet. She glanced at Jake, who had stayed up alongside her, carefully watching over the animals. He hadn't left her side since they arrived. The shelter was always understaffed, but today it felt particularly empty. The resources they had were minimal, and the reality of their situation was harsh. They had no guarantees that the pups would survive long-term, no way to predict whether Luna's recovery would last or whether the fragile bond of life they had stitched together would hold. "I'm so tired," Anna whispered, the weight of the night's work sinking in. "But I can't stop now. Not when they're this close." Jake nodded, though his own weariness was clear. "You've done everything you can. But you're right. We can't let up. Not yet. They're fighters just like you." Anna's eyes filled with tears as she looked at Luna, who seemed to be watching her, almost understanding. There was something in the dog's gaze, something that spoke of an unwavering will to survive. Anna couldn't help but feel a deep connection to Luna, this dog who had been abandoned and broken, yet still clung to life with every ounce of strength she had left. "You're not alone anymore, Luna," Anna murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "I'll make sure of it." The hours passed in a blur. Anna continued to administer fluids and monitor the puppy's condition, while Jake made calls to local vets, seeking advice and any resources they could spare. The shelter was in no condition to handle the severity of the situation, but they were doing what they could. Every minute felt like a battle, and with each passing second the stakes grew higher. They were playing against time, and time was a cruel opponent. As the day wore on, Luna started to show signs of improvement. Her eyes, once clouded with fear and weakness, now held a glimmer of recognition. She lifted her head slowly and looked at Anna with a soft, grateful expression, a quiet whine escaping her lips. It was the first time since the night she was abandoned that Luna seemed to relax, as though she knew she was no longer alone in her fight. Anna's heart swelled. "You're going to be okay," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "You and your babies, we're going to make it." But the relief was fleeting. As the sun began to set, a new crisis emerged. One of the pups, the smallest, had started to show signs of distress. His tiny body trembled, his breath shallow and labored. Luna, sensing the change, whined anxiously and nudged him gently with her nose, but the pup didn't respond. His body was growing colder, his fragile life slipping away, and Luna's panic mirrored Anna's. "Jake, something's wrong with him," Anna said, her voice thick with fear. Her hands were shaking as she gently picked up the tiny pup, holding him close. He was so small, so fragile. His heartbeat was faint, and his little body was limp in her hands. Jake rushed over, his face drawn with concern. He had seen many sick animals, but something about this little pup was different. He didn't want to say it, but they both knew the truth. It was a race against time. The pup's chances were slim, and they had no way of knowing if the medicine they had was enough. Luna's whimper filled the room as she watched Anna and Jake work frantically, trying to stabilize the pup. Her eyes never left them, her body quivering as though she could feel the gravity of the situation, her maternal instincts kicking into overdrive. Anna's mind raced. There was no backup plan, no miracle cure. She had to do everything she could to save this little one. Her hands were shaking, but she pressed on, fighting the panic rising in her chest. She could feel Luna's gaze on her, the silent bond between them strengthening. Luna had fought so hard to keep her puppies alive. Anna couldn't let that struggle be in vain. The minutes felt like hours, and the tension in the room grew unbearable. Anna fought to stay calm, but with every passing second she felt the weight of the world pressing down on her. This little pup, this tiny life, was slipping away. And then a faint twitch. It was barely noticeable, a subtle shift in the pup's tiny body. Anna's heart leaped in her chest. She held her breath. The twitch turned into a shallow gasp, and then, another. The little pup's eyes fluttered open, weak but alive. Anna exhaled in relief, the tension in her shoulders finally releasing. She looked at Jake, her face a mixture of disbelief and exhaustion. "He's alive, he's going to make it?" Luna too seemed to sense it. She moved closer, her eyes softening, and licked her puppy's face gently. The bond between mother and child was undeniable, and in that moment, Anna knew that Luna had given everything she had, to ensure her babies survived. And now she wasn't alone. She had a family, both animal and human, fighting alongside her. "Thank you, Luna," Anna whispered, her voice breaking. "Thank you for trusting me." It wasn't over. But for the first time there was hope. The night seemed to stretch on forever, the hours bleeding into one another as Anna sat beside Luna and her puppies. The room was quiet except for the soft sound of breathing, Luna's steady exhale, the tiny rhythmic gasps of the pups as they slept, now nestled in a blanket of warmth and care. The crisis had passed for the moment, but Anna couldn't shake the exhaustion that had settled deep within her bones. It wasn't just physical fatigue, it was the emotional toll of the past 24 hours, the weight of the decisions made, the near misses, the uncertainty. She leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes for a moment. The shelter was still silent. The other animals, all in their own cages, seemed to sense the rare calm in the air. It was a temporary peace, Anna knew that, but for now it was enough. Luna stirred beside her, lifting her head slightly to look at Anna. Her eyes were tired but filled with a deep sense of trust. She nudged her puppies, making sure they were still safe, then slowly crawled closer to Anna. Luna's body was weak, but she still managed to inch forward, her face softening as she rested her head on Anna's lap. Anna's heart tightened, and without thinking, her hand moved to gently stroke Luna's fur. Luna's eyes fluttered closed, and she let out a soft sigh, as if she could finally relax after everything that had happened. Anna's fingers traced the worn patches of her coat, the places where Luna's body had suffered. There was so much pain in her past, so much loss. Yet here now there was a glimmer of something else, a bond, a connection. "Thank you, Luna," Anna whispered softly, almost as if she were speaking to herself. "You've been so strong. You've done more than anyone could ever ask of you. And now we'll make sure you never have to go through this again." The promise felt heavier than she had expected. The weight of it settled in her chest as she realized how much more Luna and her puppies would need from her. How much more she would need to give. There were no easy answers, no guarantees. But this was what hope looked like. It wasn't about magic or miracles. It was about doing everything in your power to fight for what was right, even when the odds were stacked against you. The tiny pup, the one who had come so close to slipping away, let out a faint whine in his sleep, stirring in his blanket. Luna's ears perked up and she turned her head to check on him. Her motherly instincts were as sharp as ever. Anna smiled, her eyes misting over as she watched the bond between them. "You're doing great," Anna murmured to Luna, brushing a tear from her cheek. "They're going to be okay." But Luna wasn't the only one feeling the weight of gratitude. Anna too felt the emotional shift. She had never expected to find herself in this position, caring for animals that others had discarded. She had come into this work with the best of intentions, but the depth of connection she had found with Luna and her puppies was something she hadn't anticipated. It was raw. It was real. And it made everything worth it. As the night deepened, Luna fell into a peaceful sleep, her breathing slow and steady. The pups were nestled safely against her, their small bodies warm, their tiny hearts beating strong and steady. Anna knew they still had a long road ahead of them, but tonight, there was something more than just survival. Tonight there was hope. And with that hope came the understanding that no matter how dark the night seemed, there was always light waiting to break through. It wasn't always visible at first, but if you stayed strong long enough, if you fought hard enough, it would find its way to you. Anna looked down at Luna, her heart swelling with a quiet promise. "I'll never let you go," she whispered, her voice steady and full of conviction. "We'll face this together." Luna's tail gave a faint wag in response, and Anna knew it was more than just a simple gesture. It was a silent agreement between them. The storm outside raged on, but within these walls, a quiet victory had been won. The morning sun crept through the shelter's cracked windows, casting faint rays of light across the room where Luna and her puppies rested. The storm had passed, but the air still felt heavy with the weight of all that had transpired. Anna watched them as they slept, her eyes glued to their tiny forms, especially the smallest one who had been so close to death just hours ago. Now he was breathing steadily, his little body curled up against his siblings. The contrast from the night before was almost too much to grasp. But Anna knew better than to get too comfortable. The struggle wasn't over. It would never be over, not for Luna, not for her pups, and certainly not for herself. The road ahead was uncertain, and Anna could feel the pressure mounting in her chest, a reminder that there were so many more hurdles they had yet to overcome. A soft whimper broke the silence. Luna stirred, blinking up at Anna, her eyes filled with gratitude, and beneath that, an unspoken plea. Luna's body was still frail, and though her spirits had lifted since the previous night, the recovery would take time. Anna reached down and gently stroked Luna's head, offering what comfort she could. "You're doing well," Anna murmured. "You've been through so much, but you're stronger now. We're all stronger." Luna nuzzled her, resting her head back down. For a moment, it seemed as though the two of them shared a silent understanding, a bond forged through survival and compassion. Anna stood slowly, her joints stiff from the hours of sitting and tending to them. She had to get more supplies, especially antibiotics for Luna, and more formula for the pups. She needed to check on the other animals in the shelter as well. It wasn't a luxurious place, but it was all she had, and right now, every minute was critical. She had never felt so torn between wanting to stay with them and knowing that the world outside needed her too. As Anna prepared to leave the room, Jake appeared in the doorway, his face pale and tired but still determined. "I've been thinking about what we're going to do with them," he said quietly. "The pups, they need a vet. Luna's still weak. We don't have the resources here to treat them properly." Anna felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She knew what Jake was saying, what they both knew in their hearts. The shelter wasn't equipped for a case like this. They didn't have enough funds to cover a vet visit, let alone ongoing care for a mother dog and her pups. They needed help, but where would it come from? "We'll figure it out," Anna said, her voice stronger than she felt. "Somehow we'll make it work. I won't let them suffer. They've come this far, no way am I going to give up now." Jake nodded, but his eyes told a different story. He had seen enough animal rescue cases to know how quickly hope could slip away when there were no resources to support it. "I'll see what I can do," he said, heading for the back office to make calls. Anna didn't have time to dwell on the uncertainty. She needed to keep going. She needed to be there for Luna, for the pups. She had made a promise and she wasn't about to break it. The day passed in a blur of activity. Anna managed to gather what she could: more supplies, a few bags of food, and a tentative promise from a local vet to help, if only for a consultation. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. As the evening settled in, she returned to the room with Luna and the pups, feeling the weight of the world on her shoulders. The pups were awake now, their little eyes blinking up at her as they moved around weakly, struggling to stand. They were so small, so fragile. But they were alive. And that was more than she had ever expected. Luna lifted her head as Anna entered, and for a brief moment their eyes met. Luna's gaze was filled with exhaustion, but also something else, something deeper. It was a mixture of trust, gratitude, and a quiet understanding that she wasn't alone anymore. Anna had come through for her, and Luna had come through for Anna. "You're not alone anymore," Anna whispered, settling beside them. "We're going to get through this together. I promise you that." But as Anna sat there, her thoughts were interrupted by a quiet knock at the door. It was Jake, holding a phone in his hand. His face was grave. "There's someone who might be able to help," he said, his voice low. "A rescue group. They've agreed to take Luna and the pups if we can get them there tonight. They have better resources, vets, fosters, everything." Anna froze. The possibility was both a lifeline and a heavy burden. She had fought so hard to bring them this far. Letting go now felt like an impossible decision. But Luna and her pups needed more than she could give. This was their best chance. "I'll get them ready," Anna said, her voice steady, though her heart felt like it was breaking in two. "They're going to make it." Luna looked up at Anna one last time, her eyes full of silent gratitude. And in that moment Anna knew she had done everything she could. Luna had survived because of her, and Anna would carry that with her no matter what came next. The shelter was quiet again, the kind of stillness that followed a storm. But this was no ordinary calm. It was a stillness born of uncertainty, of the heavy realization that everything Anna had fought for was about to change. The puppies were asleep, their tiny bodies rising and falling with each breath, while Luna lay beside them, her eyes heavy with exhaustion but never leaving Anna's side. Anna sat on the floor, her back against the cold wall, her hands resting lightly on her knees. The phone call from the rescue group had come just before dusk. It was an opportunity for Luna and her pups to get the care they desperately needed, but with it came the hardest decision Anna had ever had to make. She had done everything she could, but now they needed more than the shelter could provide. They needed a future, a real chance at a life beyond these walls. As she looked at Luna, who now appeared less fragile, more alive, Anna's heart clenched. The bond they had formed over the past few days was undeniable. Luna had come to her in desperation, abandoned and broken, and Anna had fought tooth and nail to keep her and her puppies alive. But now, after all the hours spent nursing them back from the brink of death, Anna had to let them go. She had to let them go for their sake. Luna lifted her head, sensing Anna's inner turmoil. Her gaze softened and she moved closer, nudging Anna's hand with her nose. It was a small gesture, but one that carried a world of meaning. It was as if Luna understood the choice being made, and in that understanding there was trust. There was love. Anna blinked back the tears that threatened to spill. She had always known the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she had never imagined it would hurt this much. She had always dreamed of rescuing animals, of giving them the life they deserved, but she hadn't expected to become so deeply connected to them. Luna and her pups were no longer just a job to Anna. They had become her family, and letting them go felt like losing a part of herself. Jake entered the room quietly, his face as solemn as Anna's. He had been there every step of the way, helping, comforting, supporting. But even he knew how hard this was going to be for Anna. "They're ready," Jake said softly, glancing at Luna and her pups. "I've packed the things the rescue group asked for: blankets, food, the basics. They're waiting for us at the drop-off point." Anna nodded but didn't move. She wasn't sure she could. Her heart was heavy, and every part of her screamed to stay, to fight harder, to find a way to make this work. But she knew it wasn't about her. It was about Luna. It was about the puppies. I can't believe it's already time," Anna whispered, her voice breaking. "I've watched them fight so hard. They've been through so much. I don't want to let them go." Jake sat beside her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. I know this is hard. But they need more than what we can give them. And you've done everything you can. You've given them a chance, a real chance. That's more than most animals ever get." Anna wiped her eyes, but the tears kept coming. She had worked so hard for this moment, to bring Luna and her puppies from the brink of death to the possibility of a future. But now, as the reality of what had to happen next set in, she felt like she was giving them up. And the thought of walking away from them now, after all they had been through, tore her apart. Luna, sensing Anna's distress, gently licked her hand. It was a quiet gesture, but it carried more than words ever could. Luna trusted her, and in return, Anna had to trust that this was the right thing to do. "You're going to be okay," Anna whispered to the dog, her voice trembling. "You're going to get the care you need. And you'll have a family who loves you. I promise." Luna's eyes softened, and Anna could have sworn she understood. The silent exchange between them was profound, one that words could never capture. Luna wasn't just a dog anymore. She was a symbol of everything Anna had fought for, the resilience, the love, the unspoken bond between them. Letting go was not a defeat, it was a victory in its own right. Luna and her pups were going to be okay, and that was enough. "Let's do this," Anna finally said, her voice steady despite the sadness that lingered in her chest. Together, Anna and Jake gently gathered Luna and her puppies. The pups were sleepy, snuggling into their mother's warmth as they were carefully placed in the carrier. Luna followed, her eyes fixed on Anna's face as if saying goodbye without a sound. It took everything Anna had to open the door and step out into the night. The sky was dark, but the stars above seemed to shine a little brighter, as if giving her strength. The drive to the drop-off point was quiet, the tension in the air palpable. Anna could hardly look at Luna without feeling her heart break. She kept her hand on the carrier, not wanting to let go even for a second. When they reached the rescue group, a team of volunteers rushed to meet them. Anna felt a pang in her chest as the carrier was taken from her hands. It was hard, so much harder than she had imagined. But as Luna looked up at her one last time, Anna knew this was the right choice. Luna's future was brighter now, and so were her pups. "Goodbye," Anna whispered, her voice barely audible. "You're free now." As the car drove away, Anna watched them fade into the distance. She had saved them. And in doing so, she had given them the greatest gift of all, a chance to live. The shelter felt emptier than ever. Anna stood in the quiet, her hands pressed against the cool surface of the desk, eyes staring blankly at the wall. The weight of the decision was still heavy on her heart, like an anchor that wouldn't let go. It had only been a few hours since Luna and her pups had left, but it already felt like a lifetime. The silence that filled the space now was different, more hollow. Without Luna's gentle breathing, without the tiny whines of her puppies, the shelter felt like a place lost to time. Jake had gone to handle a few things, leaving Anna alone to process everything. She had been here before, after all, facing tough choices, making difficult decisions. But this one was different. This time she had let go of something she had worked so hard to save. It wasn't just the physical struggle, the fight for survival. It was the emotional battle too. It was the love she had given and the love she had to release. Her phone buzzed, snapping Anna out of her thoughts. She glanced at the screen, and a small smile tugged at her lips when she saw the message. It was from the rescue group. "Luna and the puppies arrived safe. They're being treated by a vet right now. They're going to be just fine. Thank you, Anna. You gave them a chance they never would have had without you." Anna's eyes welled up again, but this time the tears were different. They weren't just sorrow. They were something else, something that felt like peace. The kind of peace you get when you know you've done everything you could, when you've made the hardest decision with love, even if it hurts. She ran a hand over her face, the weight on her chest lightening just a little. Maybe it wasn't goodbye after all. Maybe it was just the beginning of something new. Luna and her puppies would be cared for now, loved and safe. And in return, Anna had given them more than she had ever expected. She had given them the gift of life, the gift of hope. Anna's heart still ached, but the pain was no longer overwhelming. It was tempered with the knowledge that Luna and her pups were out there, starting fresh. Maybe one day Anna would get to see them again, maybe not. But their story wasn't over. It was just beginning. And as Anna sat there in the quiet of the shelter, she realized that her story wasn't over either. In fact, it was just getting started. She stood up, took a deep breath, and glanced at the empty kennels. There were still so many more animals who needed her, more lives to save, more battles to fight. There were still broken hearts to mend, still souls who needed to know that someone cared. The work would never be done, but that was what made it worth doing. She knew she couldn't save them all. No one could. But she could keep going. She could keep fighting for them, one animal at a time. And that, she realized, was enough. With a final glance at the empty room, Anna turned and walked out of the shelter. The door clicked shut behind her, but it wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something new. A new chapter. a new story. And in that story there would always be room for hope. In moments of sacrifice and love, we find the true meaning of compassion. Anna's journey with Luna and her puppies shows us that even when the path is painful, the choice to do what's best, no matter how hard, is the greatest act of love. It's not always about keeping what we cherish the most, but about giving others the chance they deserve to thrive. If Luna's story moved you, if you believe that love can truly save lives, then share this video. Let others feel the power of compassion and the beauty of second chances. Like, comment, and if this story touched your heart, subscribe, because together we can continue to spread hope, one story at a time. You never know who needs to hear this today.